What's up guys, welcome to the Chess Giant. This is Solomon Riddell, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you one of the worst chess openings I've ever seen. It's a response against the move e4 in which we start off with the Alakins Defense, playing knight f6, attacking that pawn on e4, and 9 times out of 10, maybe even 99 times out of 100, you're going to see white play the move e5, and usually in the Alakins Defense, we're going to play knight e5, really centralizing our minor piece and looking to later attack this extended pawn on e5. But now we're going to be going over the Brooklyn variation with the crazy looking move knight g8. The only reason I can come up with for why it's called this is because Brooklyn is known for its trash talk. Brooklyn Dave on the Coffee Chess YouTube channel is a great example of this. I've actually played the Brooklyn variation against Brooklyn Dave one time, and it led to a pretty fun game. I believe this opening is a good choice if you're trying to find something to mess with your friends, and I actually find the position pretty interesting. As black, we have the same exact position as before. We played knight f6, and we went straight back. White, on the other hand, has almost the same position, except obviously there is a pawn that was on e2, and it's been thrown all the way to e5. This is not losing for black by any means. I do think that black really needs to prioritize developing the pieces and trading down whenever possible. But I do believe that the Brooklyn variation is completely playable and is a good choice if you're looking to talk some trash with your friends. So there's no chess opening theory on this variation, probably because most players don't want to play knight f6 and then just go straight back home to g8. So I thought in today's video, instead of doing the usual chess opening theory and chess opening strategy, we would go over a game. And y'all are not going to believe this. This variation has actually been played by Magnus Carlsen. And I know some of you are probably thinking, okay, he probably did this on chess.com or Lead Chess against some 1200 or 1300 level player. No, he did this against Laurent Fressinet, a strong 2700 plus rated FIDE Grandmaster in the FIDE World Blitz Championship in the year of 2014. This was a big game, and we saw Carlsen play knight g8. Carlsen might be the only person I know or have ever heard of that can ever get away with such a move in such a high profile level tournament. So I thought we'd go over this game in which Magnus Carlsen honestly played pretty flawlessly. It started off with Fressinet playing d4 and now Carlsen playing d6. Usually we have our knight not on g8 but on b6 in the Alekhine Defense, and then we look to play d6, looking to really undermine White's overextended pawn structure in the center of the board. White does get an advantage in space, but these pawns are weak and vulnerable to attack, especially later on in the middle of the game, and Carlsen wastes no time playing d6, putting some pressure on that centralized pawn. We see the move knight f3, and then Carlsen again continues with c6. Both the d6 and c6 pawns here really trying to lock up the 5th rank in the center and the queen side of the board. Following h3, we now see the move bishop f5. This is a very key move. We don't want to play e6 before moving our bishop out, and we don't want to play a move like bishop d7 because the bishop wouldn't be very active. This bishop on f5 is a very active and good piece on this h7 to b1 diagonal, and now White decided to play bishop d3, looking to trade down. Now, because we are behind in development and have a little bit less space and therefore are more cramped, we want to trade down whenever possible. So we see Carlsen take that bishop on d3 and then continue with d takes e5. We see the move knight takes e5, which I think is the best option. One may be tempted to take with the pawn, but again, we as black, behind a little bit in development, in a more cramped position, are always looking to trade down. And I think after queen takes d3 and c takes d3, black is completely fine. We're going to continue with e6, really locking that e5 pawn in, and then we're going to continue with knight e7, followed by knight d7. This knight on d7 is putting direct pressure on e5, and this knight on e7 can soon come to f5 or d5, and this bishop will then get in the game. I actually like black's position here. So White was probably smart not to take with the pawn and instead played knight takes e5, and this knight on e5 is an extremely strong centralized piece, attacking 8 squares at the moment. And right now, Carlsen looks at his position and goes, okay, which is stronger, this knight on e5 or my knight on b8? This knight right now is only attacking 3 squares, while the knight on e5 is attacking 8. So why not play knight d7, develop our piece, and then soon take that strong knight on e5. In chess, if we see a piece of the equal value like a knight and a bishop, we always want to trade down if the opponent's piece is stronger, and obviously this knight on e5 is very powerful. Following bishop f4, we see knight gf6, and now after knight c3, we have knight takes e5. Again, white doesn't take with the pawn because they don't want to allow queen takes d3 and an even endgame. So we see the move bishop takes e5 and now e6. Carlsen here with the Brooklyn variation holding on pretty strong against a very strong FIDE Grandmaster. We see the move castling queenside, white trying to make this game more dynamic, but Carlsen just continues with bishop e7, and now we see the move king b1. The reason king b1 was probably played was simply to get out of this h6, c1 diagonal. You never know when something can break open, and in chess we always want our kings to be as safe as possible. Usually when castling kingside, our king is pretty well tucked, but that is one disadvantage of castling queenside, is that your king is on c1 and is a little bit more prone to attack. However, castling queenside is also more aggressive. We see Carlsen castle on the opposite side, and now the move queen g3 eyeing this g7 square, and now Carlsen just plays knight h5 attacking this queen on g3. Following queen f3, we have knight f6, and now after h4, knight d7. Again, Carlsen just trying to trade down whenever possible, attacking the centralized bishop on e5. And now white plays knight e4. White has a pretty good position here, but Carlsen doesn't play passive chess like rook e8 or queen e8 or h6. We instead see the move queen a5, a dynamic option, both the queen and the knight, creating some counterplay here, attacking that centralized bishop. And now we have white play queen g3. We did have two attackers, and white only had one defender. So we see the move queen g3, which really does two things. It defends the bishop, and it also threatens mate in 1. Now Magnus Carlsen, being the best player in the world, wasn't about to lose at move 18, so he took the bishop on e5, and following d takes e5, wasted no time playing rook a d8. This rook on d1 would love to come to the 7th rank, attack our bishop, attack the pawn on b7, and on top of that, we always want to put our rooks in open files. The rook on a8 isn't doing much right now. In fact, its scope is literally limited to the pawn in front of it, so why not put it on the open file and really contest this d file with a rook on d1. White continues with knight d6, and here Carlsen takes the knight on d6 with the bishop. Now, I personally was a little bit surprised when I saw this move. I mean, white continues with queen takes d6, and it may seem, at least to me it did, after the moves rook takes d6 and e takes d6, that this pawn was extremely strong on d6, 2 squares away from promotion. But here Carlsen realized that this pawn, as far as it was up the board, was extremely vulnerable to attack, and Carlsen spent the next 8 moves simply trying to win the pawn on d6. We see the move rook d8 right now attacking that pawn, and following rook d1, continuing with rook d7. A key idea, we cannot allow this pawn to come to d7 here. We need to play rook d7, put an end to that, and also defend our f7 and b7 pawns. This rook is very solidly placed, and there's really no weaknesses in the black position. We see white continue with b3, giving the king a little bit of breathing room, and now the move h6. Black also giving itself some breathing room. We don't want to get back rank mated, and now, because of the move h6, a back rank mate can no longer happen because our king will always have an escape square. White continues with queen f4, in which Carlsen continues with queen c5. Again, this pawn may seem very strong, but we have a queen and a rook both attacking it, and right now, neither the queen or the rook can really leave it. We have the move g3, and now f6. Notice how white is a little bit stuck. The queen can't really leave the pawn, the rook can't really move the pawn, but Carlsen just keeps improving his position. Moves like h6, f6, e6, king f7. Following the move queen d2, we now see e5. He's slowly expanding up the board, and now white made a huge mistake in the move rook c3. Now white was probably hoping for queen takes d6, in which case white is completely winning following rook d3, forming a battery ram, attacking the queen on d6. If we take the rook on d3, white would simply take back with the pawn, and if we get our queen out of the way, rook takes d7 check is played, and we can't take that rook because we would lose our queen. White is completely winning this game. However, Carlsen didn't take the pawn on d6 because of rook d3, and instead played the move queen b4, attacking the rook, making it so that if the rook went back to d3, we would simply take the queen. And I personally was a little bit curious. I mean, why didn't white just play rook d3 here? Well, now black could take that queen, and following rook takes d2, continue with king e6. Now we have two attackers on the one pawn. I mean, let's say white plays a move like king b2. We're going to take that pawn on d6. If white takes our rook, we're simply going to be in a king endgame, a pawn ahead. And if not, I mean, let's say white plays a move like rook e2, we can start expanding on the king side of the board, being a pawn ahead and having a better position in king activity here. Again, remember, in endgames, we want our kings to be as active as possible. In the opening, you want to keep your king protected because there's so much firepower coming at you. But in the endgame, we have nothing to worry about. In fact, we can play king f5, king g4, king f3. Notice how this d6 rook would be cutting off the d file from the king on b2. And we can also push our pawns with, say, e4, g5, f5, h5, g4, keep pushing. Our rook could even come to d1 and cause some havoc on this back rank. Black is completely winning this. So here white, in the World Blitz Championship, not trying to give black an easy win, played the move king b2, trying to keep pieces on the board, trying to keep this game as complicated as possible. We now see rook takes d6, attacking that queen on d2, and following queen e2, a very nice move from Carlsen, queen d4. The real reason I like this move is that now neither the rook or the king can move. I mean, this rook cannot legally move anywhere because it's pinned by the queen to the king on b2, and the king on b2 can't move because it's currently protecting this rook on c3. If we move this king anywhere else, the rook will simply fall. So right now, the only major piece that can move is the queen on e2, and we see white play queen h5 check, attacking the king on f7, and following king f8, play queen f5. Here white is threatening queen c8 check, attacking our king, and then taking that pawn on b7. So Carlsen just plays b5, advancing the pawn, and now creating a threat of its own with b4, looking to gang up on that rook. White sees this and plays the move a3, in which Carlsen plays king g8. Carlsen is really in no rush here. In fact, the next move, Carlsen continues with king f7. Here, Carlsen realizes that white is in a very uncomfortable position. I mean, really, the only piece that can move is the queen on f5. The king can't move, the rook can't move. Why not move around a little bit, slowly improve the position, and eventually make the strike to win the game? We see the move b4 from white, really trying to prevent a5, supporting a b4 push, and now king f7. Following queen c8, we now have h5. Notice how Carlsen just keeps slowly improving this position here. And now after queen f5, we have queen g4 offering up a trade. Here white decided to trade off, and now we go into a rook endgame, a pawn ahead, but now in a little bit of a different situation because we have double pawns on g4 and g7. The rest of this endgame is very instructive as Carlsen played it to perfection. Following king c1, we have king e6, and after a4, Carlsen continues with a6. Some may be a little confused by this. I mean, why don't we just take the pawn on a4? The reason Carlsen didn't play this is because it gives white counterplay. Taking this pawn isn't technically wrong, but it gives white counterplay and attacking chances in the fact that rook a3 can be played, taking that pawn, and then attacking the isolated pawn on a7. Maybe even playing rook a3, taking the pawn, and then playing rook a6, attacking two of the pawns. Why would we complicate the game? Why not just play a6, keep this position locked up, keep our position with zero weaknesses, and slowly advance up the board for the win? We see the move a5, locking up the queen side of the board, and now king d7. The whole purpose of this is simply to defend the pawn on c6, and we now see Carlsen continue after rook e3 with rook d5 looking to support this c5 push, which he plays the very next move. And now after king c2, we have the move c4. So now that Carlsen has locked up this position on the queen side, the three pawns and the king, we're going to see Carlsen start to attack on the king side of the board. Following the move rook e4, we see f5 attacking the rook. Following rook e3, we now have king e6, followed by rook d3 offering up a trade. Here taking the rook doesn't work because after taking that rook back and king d2, we have e4, a very solid pawn chain that honestly can't be stopped. We're simply going to play king d5, king c4, and go on to win this game. So here white played the move king c2, but this is also completely winning for Carlsen, as we see the move rook takes e3, and following f takes e3, king d5. Here after the move king d2, white resigned the game because Magnus Carlsen has a completely one king endgame, as he could simply continue with king e4. And after king e2, I think this is a very instructive position in terms of king and pawn endgames and in terms of opposition. We have a king on e4 and a king on e2, and honestly we would love for it to be white's move. Why would we want this king on e2 to move? Why would we ever want it to be our opponent's move? Well, if the king moved to f2, it would be giving up d3, and if the king moved to d2, it would be giving up f3. No matter where this king goes, white is giving up a square. Carlsen could have simply continued with g6, and now white has to give something up. I mean, white would just love to hand the move back to black, making us make a decision here, but instead, this king has to move to d2 or f2, and in either case, white gives something up. Now we're going to take that pawn on c3, and we have ourselves a one game. Nice, instructive game by Magnus Carlsen playing the Brooklyn variation in a World Blitz Championship. If you'd like to learn more on the theory behind the actual Alakins Defense, click the video to the left. If you'd like to learn more about the Hippopotamus Defense, a strong and fun chess opening, click the video to the left. Leave a comment to let me know what other videos you'd like to see covered on this channel. And as always, I appreciate you guys. Thanks for watching. Peace.